I'm glad to welcome you this morning for the next edition of the webinar series, Space, Safety and Security. We will look today at space, safety, security in the context of R&D, of capability development and capacity building. I'm very glad to have a good mix of speakers. And maybe we start by setting the scene. I welcome Mathieu Bataille from the European Space Policy Institute in Vienna. The European Space Policy Institute is a think tank for space with the mission of providing decision makers with an informed view on mid to long-term issues relevant to European space activities. Mathieu, you follow the development of European space policy very, very closely. You define position. You make also studies on selected topics. With this broad overview, maybe you could set for us the scene and introduce today's discussion. Please, the floor is yours.
Good. Thank you, Roya. Thank you also to Nereus for the invitation, and good morning, everyone. As Roya mentioned, my name is Mathieu Bataille. I'm a research fellow in charge of security and defense activities at SP. And yes, I will really give an overview because I think that Florent and Lucy will go more into detail later on. So first, when we are talking about the relations between space, security and defense, what are we talking about? We have here two dimensions, which are I think important. So first, space for security and defense. So basically the space applications that are useful to conduct security and defense operations on Earth. And second, security and defense of space, here meaning the protection of satellites and other space systems in orbit, which are facing more and more threats today. And of course, these two dimensions are interrelated. Given that if you rely more and more on satellites for your operations on Earth, then these satellites are more at risk from potential threats or adversaries. And on the contrary, if there is an issue, let's say, with these satellites in orbit, it will impact your operations on Earth. Sorry. So then the global context and the relations between space, security and defense have kind of evolved quite a lot in the past, I would say 5-6 years. And this evolution happened around three main dimensions. So first, at the strategic and policy level, I would say, and even doctrinal level, space has been more and more recognized as a warfighting domain, so a domain where operations can be conducted. And it led many countries to have a more assertive posture vis-à-vis this environment. It also led to renewed talks about deterrence in space and also to the need to create partnerships with allies to face potential adversaries. And all of this is crystallized by the multiplication of space defense strategies or defense space strategies, depending on the country, that we have seen in the past few years. And so here I just put a few. So we have the US, we have the UK, France, Italy, Luxembourg, and Australia. So you see that there is also a diversity of countries being interested in the topic. The second level is the organizational one. There is a higher focus put on space in the military apparatus, and entities dedicated to the management of military space issues have been created. So be it space forces, space commands, etc. These entities deal with the two aspects of space, so integrating better space in the operations on Earth, but also protecting space assets in orbit. And so what we see, it's also a kind of autonomization of space from other domains, in particular from the air domain, while of course continuing to have a joint approach and discussing with the other branches of the military. The third level is the capability development level, which is also something we will address today. So on the one hand, there is an, let's say, increased interest by many states in having their own military spacecraft, so spacecraft for military purposes. And in particular, at least in major spacefaring nations, you see also kind of development of anti-satellite or counter space systems, which basically can destroy or disrupt satellites and so have an impact on the service they provide. Now, what's happening at European level? So first, if we look at the EU, there is here a dual dynamic, I would say. On the one hand, the security and defense dimension of space is more and more, I would say, recognized in the EU space initiative. So we already had with Galileo and Copernicus specific applications dedicated to security and defense. I'm thinking about the public regulated service of Galileo, for instance, or the Copernicus Security Service. But with the more recent initiatives, we also see that this defense component is really integrated from the start of the program. And so here we can think about IRIS², but we can also see some evolutions, for instance, with Copernicus, which is expected to have a governmental service, which will clearly, let's say, have a military applications. The second, I would say the second dynamic is basically that you have a space being integrated into defense initiatives, and that I guess that other panelists will mention it as well, but basically you have space projects under PESCO, under the European Defence Fund, and also integrated into EDA activities, but Lucy will mention it. At ESA level, so ESA is working exclusively on security. So here we talk more about security of people on Earth, in particular from natural disasters, but of course not only. And two main initiatives can be mentioned. So first, the Rapid and Resilient Crisis Response Accelerator, and second, the Civil Security from Space program. And here Florent will develop on them later on. So now all of that can be kind of implemented through different channels, and these channels lie with different actors. So as I said, we have the European Defence Agency with the Coordinated Annual Review of Defence, the Defence and Space Forum, etc., etc. Again, I will not develop more. The European Defence Fund, which is basically a fund to fund R&D initiatives in defence, including in space defence. And I think so. We were talking earlier about the conference in Brussels that happened yesterday and the day before. It was told that around 10% of this fund each year is dedicated to space-related projects. We also have PESCO, the Permanent Structured Cooperation, which is an intergovernmental mechanism under the umbrella of the EU, and also has dedicated projects dedicated to space. And finally, ESA programs, in particular, the two initiatives I mentioned earlier. And maybe one point to mention, the important point from last year, is the release by the EU, so the European Commission and the high-level representative, the High Representative Vice President, of the EU Space Strategy for Security and Defense, which is quite notable because it's the first time that such a strategic document was released at EU level. And you can see with the 5 objectives that the main idea behind this document is really to kind of coordinate member states' efforts, and including in terms of definition of, for instance, what a threat is, how do we react together, etc., while, of course, opening the door to international cooperation with like-minded partners. So this growing involvement in military space has very concrete consequences, and the first one is, of course, on investment in the domain. The expenditures have increased quite a lot in recent years, and a few examples can be shown. So, for instance, the French law on military programming that was adopted last year dedicates 6 billion euros to space-related projects, initiatives, which is 40% more than what was the case in the previous law on military programming. Also, after the war in Ukraine, you know that Germany announced a 100 billion euros fund basically related to defense, and also part of this fund is dedicated to space. It's a bit more complex to know exactly how much, but at least it's also a good signal, let's say, for the community. And more recently, Germany also announced that they intend to have a MEO satellite communication constellation in medium Earth orbit. But of course, it's not only, let's say, the traditional or big countries that are investing in that. And here I have the example of Poland, which got 2 very high resolution observation satellites from Airbus early last year, in particular due to developments in Ukraine, but also more generally because Poland wants also to step up its activity in space security, space defense. Another component that is very important to take into account is the need to develop skills. If I take again the example of the war in Ukraine, it appears that while Russia had superiority in terms of space capacity over Ukraine, either they did not integrate it very well into their operations, or they were not very able to use them properly. And so that's why, for instance, the US Space Force Chief of Space Operations said that there is a need to make sure that not only do we have the systems to do the mission, so which is, I would say, capability development, but that our operators have the training and the experience, and we have validated tactics that actually enables those capabilities. And so here we can see two aspects. First, there is a need to attract people in the space field and in the military space sector in particular. This is something that the whole European space sector is facing at the moment, that is difficulty of attracting talents, and maybe this is something where regions could play a role by developing clusters, by supporting their universities with space curricula, etc., etc. And the second aspect is to provide an adequate training to the operators, of course. And so that is done through exercises that aim at preparing the forces to a conflict in space or involving space. And so we have, let's say, multiplication of these exercises in the past few years, including in Europe with Asterix, for instance, and the space threat response architecture. And we can expect more in the future. And now, to finish a bit quickly, I just want to give a few concrete examples on how space is used for security and defense purposes. So here, more for defense, in the context of the war in Ukraine. So the war in Ukraine has been, I would say, space conflict from day one, and actually even before day one, because you all remember maybe that in the months before the start of the conflict, there were many pictures taken that were showing Russian troops movements around the Ukrainian border. Also, during the first day of the war, a cyber attack was launched against the satellite Ka-sat, which was providing connectivity to many segments of the Ukrainian population, including military forces. And so, of course, one of the objectives was also to disrupt operations of Ukrainian forces against Russia. Then the Ukrainian government called to a private company, SpaceX, to provide their Starlink service to Ukraine, which was done in a few weeks, showing also the importance of commercial actors. However, it was also revealed after a few months that Starlink decided at some point to curb the capacity of SpaceX. So we decided to curb the capacity of Starlink because they kind of disagreed with the way it was used by Ukrainian forces, which of course raises a question of the power, let's say, we should give to these commercial actors. In the realm of Earth observation, commercial actors were also very, very important. Basically, many data were given for free or under contract to the Ukrainian authorities. But what's interesting is really to see the multiplicity of sensors that were used, which also show how lively the ecosystem is. So we had optical, we had radar, we had here radar, we had also RF monitoring, etc., etc. And so all of this, this involvement of the industry was also present in an initiative that was launched by some companies, I think around 30 companies, if I'm not mistaken, which basically gathered to raise a fund for Ukraine and to support the implementation of humanitarian projects in Ukraine. So of course, the industry was not implementing the projects themselves. These are kind of trusted NGOs doing it, but it's still something quite, I think, quite interesting to mention. And so to conclude, this conflict in Ukraine also raised, gave two main lessons to observers. First, the cyber dimension of space infrastructure is key. Of course, it's something that was known already before, but not so much was actually done to protect, let's say, the cyber aspects of satellites. And after the attack against Ka-sat, we have seen the integration of the cyber dimension in many also policy documents, so such as the EU Space Strategy for Security and Defense, but also the EU policy on cyber defense. So there is really awareness on this problem. And the second aspect is the main role or the major role of commercial actors now in security and defense missions. Which also again raises questions. So first, how do you benefit from these actors without becoming too reliant on them? And second, how do you protect these actors in case they are targeted because of their participation in your security and defense efforts? And I think these two lessons and these questions are really important to keep in mind when further reflecting on the links between space, security and defense. And so with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and happy to take questions if you have some. And I hope I'm not being too long.
No, thank you very much, Mathieu, for this in-depth insight. I like to move on to the next speaker. Vasilis, Mathieu gave us some examples how space is used in the armed conflict in Ukraine, and also some aspects for reflection related to this. You work with EUSPA, the European Union Agency for the Space Program, whose mission is to be a user-oriented operational agency of the EU Space Program. And you contribute to growth, security, and safety of the European Union also through satellite-based service. As part of your activities, you launched a special initiative, EU Space for Ukraine, providing space solutions to enhance humanitarian aid for the Ukrainian people. We will present the initiative in one of the next webinars more in detail. But nevertheless, could you give us already a first snapshot, please?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Roya, for having me. Yeah, I don't have indeed in these slides, just to say a couple of words. First of all, I have to say it was an amazing introduction by Mathieu. He touched about on very, very interesting issues. Now, as regards, you mentioned it, we are a very user-oriented agency, so our approach is very, really bottom-up in the majority of the things we do. So when we started with the EU Space for Ukraine initiative, we really wanted to hear actually actors on the ground, but our major target was NGOs. We wanted to work with NGOs that were active in Ukraine. So we started a couple of months after the invasion. And the first thing we do, we brought in the room, in the digital room, we have a couple of webinars with them to understand the situation really before going on with what the EU Space Program could contribute to that. So listening into prioritizing this kind of needs of NGOs and bringing also in the room startups, SMEs, EU companies that could fill this. I would call them capability gaps. I would call them problems. So it is through these discussions that we define the major use cases that we wanted to work on. We had a hackathon also. That was back in 2022. We did also a hackathon on defense and security in the framework of Cassini initiative, another important Cassini on our entrepreneurship activities that we run. So in this framework, and through this discussion with users, the major use cases that came out were the major impact of the war in the Ukrainian agriculture, which had, of course, the defense component, but it had also the environmental component. It had the financial component. We talk about a lot of, shelling and unexploded ordnance devices being left to a large part of Ukraine. And still it's there, so it's a problem that remains. So we studied the impact using primarily Sentinel data, so we use Space Program data. We had published recently a white paper and a story map, maybe I could put on the chat so people can maybe see and read the results, the output of our work. At the same time, we engaged with the Red Cross Ukraine. We demonstrated with them, the uses of drones for Galileo-powered drones for urban search and rescue operations. So we had them showing us the reality of their work, which was quite brutal, I have to say. But also at the same time, we understand the needs for them to navigate in an environment that's most of the time is changed. Me and you and everyone in the room maybe use Google Maps in a quasi-daily or other kind of navigation applications in a quasi-daily manner, but navigating an environment which is ever changing and has security and safety challenges it is difficult, and this is where satellite data and observation data from Sentinel satellites can help, and we build from them, for them, a little with them, an interface where they can plan better their operation, having a look on the Sentinel satellites, recent Sentinel data, so understanding what are the realities of the ground. Is this bridge collapsed? Yes or no? You know, simple kind of solutions, I would say. This is an initiative that it's still on. We have a community of 40, 45 or so also companies engaged along with other NGOs, and we plan to expand. And if I may, as I finish this very short intervention, because Matthew touched many things apart from the humanitarian part. Of course, the pace and a lot of actions come as a result of the strategy. Matthew mentioned it, the EU space strategy for security defense. And we as EUSPA work intensively along with the Commission on many other actions apart from EU Space for Ukraine. One of them is the Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the EU ISAC. I mentioned it before. It's a derived actions, how to make resilient our companies and our institutions. Matthew mentioned skills. We work on the EU Space Academy, so-called. We operate 24/7 the EU SST front desk. Commission lands this week feasibility studies on the potential of establishing an EU Earth observation governmental service, which was also mentioned before. So a lot of activities, a lot of work that come as a derivative, let's say, also of the strategy. I would like to thank you for this. I finished. I was on time, short, and maybe we can have another webinar dedicated so we can go into more details on what we did on EU Space for Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasilios. We for sure will have another webinar, and we will very much pleased to bring your initiative in more detail to the floor. In fact, we are working on developing a program showing how space is used in the context of humanitarian aid initiatives, and also to see how this contributes to resilience, to more safety and security. And we'll be more to keep in touch on you. We'll be glad to keep in touch on you. Good. Then I move on to our next speaker, and we are particularly glad to welcome Florent Mazurel from the European Space Agency. Florent, we heard the scene setting from Mathieu, and it would be very interesting if you could explain what ESA does in the safety security domain. If you could share a bit your views on space and security capability developments, and maybe also touch upon your views on dual use and its contribution to security in Europe. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hi, good morning, Roya, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mathieu and Vasilios, for this very good scene setter. I guess Lucy and I will be going into the capabilities area and the R&D. I'm being very inelegant. I'm talking before Lucy, but I like to keep best for last. So I'll take the floor before Lucy. Let me share my screen, and hopefully this will work. So my name is Florent Mazurel. I work for ESA. I work for DG5, which is more or less the strategy and foresight unit. I am based in Brussels, so I might be in touch already with some of the participants here. Maybe we've met, or hopefully we will meet. Now, the talks this morning already have been extremely defense-oriented and military-oriented, which is extremely and perfectly legitimate. Our position at ESA is very simple, and it's always been the same since forever, which is security to us is a very all-encompassing and very complex domain. It is not only warfare, obviously, and it's not only defense. And usually I always give this sort of anecdote because before I worked for ESA, or even fathomed working for ESA, I was a law student. And as a law student, I had a friend who was in biology, and she had a PhD on the melting of ice caps. And I asked her, so who's financing your PhD? And she told me the French Ministry of Defense. I kind of fell off my chair. I'm like, but why? Because it changes the amount of salt in the sea. What does that change? And she told me that changes the performance of submarine and sonars. So there you have it. dual use or science, technology, etc. Everything is embedded, and this is how we foresee and see security in ESA. It is something that is way beyond just intelligence, reconnaissance, etc. Weather forecast, this is an example my DG uses very often. Before you go on the ground, you lock and load, but you look at what the weather looks like. Access to space, this is the first element of security and security in space, and we've been doing this for 40 years. So of course, security now is just not a one-sided issue, multiple areas of non-military, environmental catastrophe, safety of people, migrations, humanitarian aid, development, etc. I'll give you an example. We work, of course, on the International Major Disasters Charter. February 6, 2023, that earthquake in Syria and Turkey, within 24 hours, we had 34 products that were sent directly to first-hand responders. Now, Roya, you talked about dual use. That's the elephant in the room. It's something that's being discussed over and over again. Yesterday, because there are no coincidences in life, the Commission came out with a sort of economic security package, I guess that's what it's called. And there's a strategy paper on dual use and research. I haven't had time to read it because the morning was way too short. But I invite everybody to look at it. It's probably very interesting. And what I want to come back to is this dual use aspect. When I first started in space, roughly 20 years ago, we used to say it's dual use, and therefore it would bring a policy rationale to security and space. But now it's completely embedded in everything we do. So we had a first space security conference in November 2021, where the General Dele Verano, who works for the Council of Ministers in Italy, basically said that dual use was in clear contradiction with today's security and technology evolutions. And this was echoed by General Adam, who was actually there as well yesterday in Business Bridge, but a year ago also in Business Bridge, where he was basically arguing that if you want to protect the sovereignty of a state and defense assets, you also need to protect now civilian assets on which defense forces very heavily rely, whether it's the US, France, or anybody else. That brings, of course, the capability issue, which is if dual use is now here to stay and a truism, then maybe it ushers in the fact that we might need to change the way we actually do security and maybe defense in space. European Space Agency, I'm not going to dwell on it, 7 billion euro yearly budget. And the specific thing about us is that we have activities in every spectrum of space, which is unlike NASA or anybody else. We have 22 member states, most of them, of course, except UK, Switzerland and Norway are part of the EU. Now, the other elephant in the room, because I always get that question, which is the peaceful purposes clause.
I can't see the slides. I don't know if you already shared, or is it just me that cannot see the slides?
No, I also don't see, but I don't know if he starts sharing the slides.
Okay.
Let me check again. Oh, I'm sorry, it's my fault.
Okay, great.
Is that better?
Okay, now we see
Yes.
them, but please.
I'm sorry, yeah, I work in space, but apparently I cannot manage PowerPoint. Hold on. This is better now.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you, Lucy, for calling me on this. So anyway, Article 2 of the ESA Convention, which basically says it's our peaceful purposes clause, but it was interpreted 20 years ago already as meaning non-aggressive, which means that ESA is not a civil agency per se. So it all depends on member states, on what they do, what they want to do, and how they want to do it with us. In terms of security, security has been in what we do for forever. As I mentioned before, the independent access to space, even science, or working with them inside all this security. And regularly, if not at every council and ministerial level, we have a mandate or at least orientations from our member states regarding what we ought to do in security, especially with our main partner, the EU. Now, in terms of practical missions, we have more than 100 security-related projects. This was a survey done by SP. Thank you for them to look into everything we do. Most of them obviously are Earth observation related, but a lot of them are actually PNT related. So Galileo, which and EGNOS, which we also undertake for the European Union. Now, again, the examples of what I was mentioning earlier, which was the recent earthquake, devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria. This is one of the examples of the very quick products that we can actually put towards responders as soon as we are triggered to do so. This is another example of the International Space and Major Disasters Charter, and this was Beirut. Maybe you remember in 2020, a very significant, huge blast in the harbor of Beirut that created havoc in town, and within hours already space solutions were arriving in Lebanon. Another example related to this time ISIS and the war ISIS led in Iraq. This was the oil wells that were set on fire by ISIS and trying to undermine counter-offensive efforts. Wildfires in Russia in 2018, because our members are all over the globe, but also more complex solutions such as flood analysis. And this is something in the La Boucle du Niger, so on the Niger River, with pictures taken every month to show the evolution of floods. And you could also say droughts, but also floods in Mali, Burkina Faso, and near Mauritania. This is in July. And this is the evolution in August, where you can actually tell where the floods are gathering, but also in September, clearly down south, and October all the way to December. But you know, public images are not the only thing on board. Now, there's something that Stéphane Israël, the CEO of Arianespace, mentioned yesterday regarding independent access to space. He mentioned that we're going from a world of 100% cooperation to a mix of cooperation and competition. And I thought that was very applicable to security. And as Mathieu and Vassilios mentioned, now there's a myriad of commercial operators that actually cater security forces with products. And I just wanted to show the example of ICEYE, which is a Finnish firm that also provides Earth observation solutions to its clients. Here, it's strategic site monitoring or even man-made objects identification. Now, I'll give you another example, which is something we've been doing for a very long time for the European Union, within then GMES, but now Copernicus. And we work with EMSA ever since 2010, since we've had a cooperation agreement. Now, EMSA is the Maritime Security Agency, and we work in various domains, the environment, of course, law enforcement, fisheries control, customs, etc. And we work with EMSA, but also some other agencies. And this is one of the example with the Frontex, where here we're using Copernicus data and Pléiades, which are the French satellites, for the monitoring of vessels of interest, and here within the Med and Black Sea. And how do we use various technologies? Because we have two types of technologies in Earth observation. We have radar, which is the SAR, and optical. And we use them in complementarity. SAR is very useful to actually pinpoint a target or something you want to see on a very vast area. And here we can see on the left with Sentinel-1 how it reflects light, and then you can use optical to actually hone in on an object. Now, the turning point, I'm not going to dwell on this because there was a before and an after. I've been doing security and space for a long time, and we've been laying down, let's say, policy orientations and arguments that became very clear to everyone when Russia invaded Ukraine. That was very significant. I'm not going to go back on the points that Mathieu and Vassilios raised, whether it's the ASAT, but of course of Viasat and SpaceX, the role of SpaceX. We can have a discussion on the roles now of commercial operators, especially in non-space-faring nations like Ukraine. But now what I'm trying to get out of this new momentum, not only do we have the policy momentum with the Global Compass, but the EU Space Strategy for Security and Defense, we are having announcements that there might be an industrial policy on defense that might also beef up the EDF. we might have new instruments, etc. We might have a defense commissioner, might have a defense DG and the commission, which means that things are really evolving in such a way where space will need to be dealt with in a very specific methodology. Now, the question that maybe we will be discussing here today, but also with Lucie, is how we can do this in cooperation rather than nationally. Now, institutional imagery, which is what we provide, is already available to people helping Ukraine. It was mentioned today already, but here it's Copernicus data. Some of them is open that have been used by NGOs to actually support Ukrainian forces. And Maxa was a commercial imagery provider that Mathieu mentioned. This is a pretty famous now picture of a convoy of tanks heading for Kiev on February 28th, which I think was just a couple of days after the invasion, and this is extremely telling. Now, how do we, us and ESA, fit into this whole environment? I told you there's 120 different activities, even more than that, in security. I'm just going to focus on something that Mathieu has mentioned, which are the accelerators. I'm going to focus on security in space rather than from space, because SSA, cyber, etc., is a little bit specific. It's very technology driven, and it's still in its infancy. So maybe I'll stick to what people might relate to more, which is security from space towards the ground. So you might have heard that we have now in ESA sort of a new continuum, which we call the accelerators. The inspirators I won't discuss. We have 3 accelerators, which are basically envelopes in which we have activities that have the same rationale and provide the sort of same technology towards a major contemporary issue that we're all trying to face around the world. Space for a Green Future, Rapid and Resilient Crisis Response, which we call R3, Protection of European Space Assets, which we call Protect. And here it's basically SSA, NEOs, etc. You will notice that all 3 are either directly or indirectly linked to security. And I think, honestly, that's just a coincidence, because we developed these accelerators coming from the main challenges we were facing around the globe today. And security is right at the heart of it. I'll focus more on R3, Rapid and Resilient Crisis Response, simply because I think there's been an awakening over the recent years, especially this year, which was, I think, the warmest year ever recorded on Earth. Not only does that induce climate-induced crises and emergencies, floods, flash fires, etc., but we're also focusing on other types of crises, maritime crises. It can be geopolitical, of course, with the inflow of refugees from Ukraine right after the war, but also cybercrime, which we all know, if everybody here reads the news, will be exponential over the next years. Now, what we're trying to do is give responders, because I want to be very clear about this, ESA is not a security operator. We are a security provider in the sense that we simply build the tools that security responders need. So this is a whole capability development process that has been in place since forever. And what we're trying to do is reduce the impact, of course, of crises, but also give tools for immediate management on the ground, fast recovery, and then ex-post emergency management. Now, how do we do this? The accelerator itself is not a program. Okay, so don't look for an accelerator line in our budgets. There is none. What it is a policy thrust that help us basically concentrate on where their needs are and how we can answer those needs. What we have are seed contributions. Now, you can take IRIS², Galileo, Earth Explorers, what have you. These are seed contributions to the larger effort of R3. One of these efforts, it's called CSS, which is a program that was subscribed in CM22, so in the Ministerial Council in 22, which basically is the Civil Security from Space program, where we're trying to act better and have a more, let's say, fine-tuned and coherent response technology response and capability response to modern needs of responders. To do so, we're basically creating systems of systems, and we're meshing various technologies, including very innovative technologies, SmartEO, quantum, of course, HPC, cloud computing, etc. This is all in the making through various components, dialogues with industry, of course, with member states, and foremost with partners. Because again, just like lots of institutions, including the EU, the UN, etc., we don't act on the ground and we don't intend to. Other people are mandated to do this and have the capability to do that. So, for example, in R3, we hope to have a very serious cooperation with the ICRC, the International Committee for the Red Cross, and also their foundation, OSCE, but also DG ECHO, with whom we're in touch. All this is done transparently with DG DEFIS. We have a similar talk, of course, with the European Defence Agency. Which leads me to my transition to Lucie. Our cooperation with EDA has been defining politically, but also in terms of capability development and creating a sort of culture of trust and a sort of dual use culture in our communities. We've had framework agreements since 2011, and I'm very proud to say that along the years, thanks to our colleagues in EDA and ESA, we've been able to cooperate almost in every domain, at least space domains, whether it's SATCOMs, Earth observation, PNT, etc., on cyber ranges, CBRN, Earth observation, and unmanned vehicles, whether they were aerial or maritime. Last but not least, I believe we have colleagues from the SATCEN connected. We have a very long-standing and very fruitful cooperation with the SATCEN.
Sorry, you need to come to the end.
And that's perfect, because this is my last slide. Just to mention that we've had this cooperation for a long time, and right now we're focusing on the large-scale pilot project, which looks at the impact of climate change on civil security, basically the heart of what we do. This is it. I'm sorry I was very long, and I'm sorry I didn't have the slides on the screen, but I'll be happy to take questions whenever you have it. Thank you.
Perfect. Many thanks. In fact, we have a question. We will share the presentation with the registered participants, provided you have, but we checked that verified emails. And then we have a question how to defend the Earth from potential threats from space, as well as the obvious threats from space debris and near-Earth objects, because space weather can have serious consequences due to its electromagnetic effects on Earth. Does anyone
Monsieur Lucie, do you want to take this? Okay, if I understood correctly, there's a space weather question between defense and commercial, right? And the first one I missed.
You want me to read it again? How to defend the Earth from potential threats from space, as well as the obvious threats from space debris and the near-Earth objects, because space weather can have serious consequences due to its electromagnetic effects on Earth.
Okay, I'll take this if you want to. This is extremely true. I mean, this is the Protect Accelerator. I did not discuss. This is a major program for us, in the sense that I think, at the top of my head, I think we have 850 million invested in this clean space, removal of debris, etc. But also we have a charter in place, and we also have now policies to make sure that we have less debris at every mission. Now, space weather is something a little different because it is completely scientific, and it's a question of anticipating the solar flares. Right now, at least for the military assets and with sensitive assets, there are countermeasures already on board of the satellites for them to protect themselves. But basically, as far as I know, most satellites don't. So it's a question of not only warning the satellite itself that a flare is coming, but having all the technology capabilities to protect them. This is something we actually want to look into with EDA. This is a conversation. There's nothing concrete yet, but it's a conversation we've been having, because whether you're in defense or you have a military asset or you have a scientific asset, even educational, the effect is exactly the same. And this is typically the type of domain where civ-mil cooperation makes a lot of sense. But we're hoping to get this file going with Lucie, namely, hopefully soon.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Lucie Lagarde, I then can move on to you and give you the floor. You speak today on behalf of the European Defence Agency, and your organization developed a set of capability development priorities that were approved last year by the EU Defence Minister. Could you maybe explain to us these priorities and their purpose? And in this respect, it would be also interesting to have your views on how the way we approach space has changed since. But also, what are your ideas for new capability development initiatives? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roya. Thank you very much for having me today. Can you see the slides and can you hear me well? First question.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So my name is Lucie Lagarde. I work at the European Defence Agency on space policy topic from a capability development perspective. I'm in the directorate that deals with capability, armament and planning activities at the European Defence Agency. So does that work? Yes. So first, let me start with a brief introduction on what is the European Defence Agency. EDA is an intergovernmental agency of the Council of the European Union, and we have three main missions in support of our member states. First, we support the development of defense capabilities and military cooperation. Second, we stimulate defense research and technology, and we strengthen the European defense industry. And third, we act as a military interface towards EU policies, meaning that we promote the defense interests towards EU policies and EU programs. So to achieve this, we established and we are involved in various cooperation instruments. Some of them were already mentioned by my colleague Mathieu Bataille. So first, there is the capability development plan, and I will dwell a bit more on this later on. PESCO, as we are acting as the secretariat of this framework. So for those who don't know, PESCO is a cooperation framework on defense capabilities that is really driven by member states. We also established within EDA the Coordinated Annual Review on Defense, so CARD, as we call it. CARD provides an overview of the EU defense landscapes, and it identifies collaborative opportunities via various dialogues with member states. And we also participate in the European Defence Fund. So this fund, this actually finances projects on capability development and technology and research for defense with industry. So we work on the whole spectrum of defense cooperation and in all military domains, including the space domain. And space actually has become increasingly critical for military missions and operation, as it was already pointed out by my fellow panelists. And this importance of space for defense was actually also reaffirmed in the EU Space Strategy for Security and Defense. And something that is also quite important in that strategy is that space is finally recognized as an operational domain, and this is quite significant for the defense, from a defense perspective. So within EDA in the past years, we have been conducting various space capability development initiatives and projects with our member states on space topics. So mainly focused on Earth observation, positioning, navigation and timing, SATCOM and space situational awareness. So as an example, we have since 2019 a pooling and sharing project on governmental satellite communication capacity for our participating member states. And in addition to this capability development dimension, we also have this research and technology dimension that has gained in importance in EDA in the past years. notably with the creation of the Capability Technology Group Space, CapTech Space, that has established a space strategic research agenda, and that aims to address the technological gaps that are in this domain. So now I will already dive into the capability development priorities. So as you rightly said, Roya, some month ago in November, actually 2023, our EU Ministers of Defense reaffirmed the significance of space again by adopting the new capability development plan. So this capability development plan actually enlarges the scope of our space activities. We now have 2 space capability development priorities, one on space operations, one on space services. So we'll start with the space services priority. It actually includes all the traditional space-based applications that we've been already addressing at EDA. So space situational awareness, space-based Earth observation, positioning, navigation, and timing, SATCOM. And then the priority on space operations, it includes space situational awareness, access to space, and protection of space systems. And here, the 2 last sub-priorities are quite new within the European Defence Agency. So following the adoption of the capability development plan, the next step that we are already implementing consists in a wide reflection with our member states regarding how to best implement these priorities to achieve the relevant projects and the relevant capabilities in the end. So to do so, we leverage on our existing fora with member states, in particular our Defense in Space Forum, which was already mentioned also by Mathieu. This Defense in Space Forum aims to develop a European common approach to defense capabilities in space. And we will, of course, also continue to associate relevant EU stakeholders and European stakeholders in general to our endeavors. So this includes other EU institutions, the European Space Agency, as it was mentioned as well, industry, amongst many other actors. And here I also want to stress that really cooperation is in the agency's DNA, and actually all the synergies now between civil and military space developments actually emphasize this need for cooperation. So as an example, we exchange and we contribute to the EU space programs with in partnership with the European Commission. We also cooperate with the European Space Agency, but this has already been widely said by Florent already on various types of activities that are related to space, of course. And we engage with industry, for example, on the identification of gaps and challenges in the European defense and industrial technological base. So we will leverage on all of these established relationships as well as create new ones to achieve concrete capability development outcomes in accordance with these new priorities that are shown on the slide. And actually this need for a European collaborative approach was also clearly reflected in the space strategy. And here I just wanted also to elaborate a bit more on our taskings as EDA within that strategy. So we have 3 taskings, one on reducing strategic dependencies on critical space technologies. And here we are associated with the European Commission and the European Space Agency as part of a joint task force. We also have the tasking on identifying space-related military requirements so that they can be integrated in EU space programs that are driven by the European Commission. And finally, we also have this task on defense, space education and training activities. And here we collaborate with the EU military staff and the European Security and Defense College. And we plan on collaborating with other actors. And for example, we know that ESA is also doing a lot in terms of training and skills. So this also could be something that we could cooperate on as well. Sorry, actually, I didn't have another slide. And so I actually also wanted to dwell a bit upon this this tasking on education and training, because this webinar is also focused on capacity building. So we started a mapping of all EU space educational and training activities for defense. The objectives are to identify the gaps and ultimately to develop curricula and trainings to fill those gaps. And to achieve this, we have launched a study to support us, and we will conduct a broad consultation with our member states on their education and training opportunities and their needs. So we expect first results of this work strands in mid-2024, so actually very soon. And finally, and also linked in a way to capacity building, I also wanted to introduce our efforts as part of the Hub for EU Defence Innovation. So this hub aims to stimulate, facilitate, and support cooperation on defense innovation. It conducts various actions, including, for example, the organization of an EDA Innovation Prize. It also provides for calls for demonstrator to advance some technologies that show great potential for defense, for example. So I would also recommend that you keep an eye on our activities within that hub if you have an interest in defense and space innovation. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. And of course, I'm available for any questions. I can't hear you, Roya. You're muted.
Yes, thank you. I had to mute because there were some noises and I thought it's me. Thank you to all the speakers for this rich panorama. I think we spent really the 60 minutes, past 60 minutes very effectively to broaden our views on this. I see some questions still in the chat. I'm not sure whether we will manage to respond them all. And maybe also one word to Nereus before we close. We hosted today's webinar. We organize these webinars for our members and other interested participants to promote new EU policies and programs. We have also a second series, education training. Margarita, maybe you can put in the chat also the link for the next webinar. And in this series, we are going to develop a program showing how space can be used for humanitarian initiatives. And we are also open for new topics that concern safety and security. And you are welcome to write to us and to propose topics. Nereus is a platform for regions. We currently have 22 and 36 associate partners. Our mission is to spread the use and understanding of space technologies. And we also invite you to visit our website. So if the speakers are still with us today, I share with you some questions we still received. One comment before I go to the question from Mathieu. There are some projects under the European Defence Fund that are addressing these issues.
Sorry.
Some funding was also...
Yeah, sorry, Roya. No, I was just because I didn't know whether we would have time or not to do it, but I was just responding to the question on this PNT thing. So yes, I mean, indeed, there are, I think, some projects already under the European Defence Fund which are working on providing more resilience to Galileo in particular. And also, I mean, I don't know, Florent, if you want to develop on it, but there was some budget allocated for LEO PNT at the latest ESA ministerial. I don't think like the main purpose is defense for sure, but it's still something which would allow to provide some redundancy, let's say, from Galileo. But I don't know if you want to develop on it, or if I said mistake, please feel free to correct.
Sorry, maybe I refer to the question from Ista Tuza. Do you think there is a new need from EU member states to develop their own satellite infrastructure so as to ensure control over and superiority in the space landscape in which satellites operate to protect their security? And Mathieu, I saw that you then responded.
Yes, same. I mean, as I say already in the message, so there are already, I mean, EU member states are already developing their own capabilities, at least some of them, more and more, I would say. Then, I mean, the way I understand EU efforts, and Lucy maybe can correct me, but it's really to coordinate all of that because it doesn't make sense that 27 countries have, 27 times the same kind of capability. And so also because, I mean, let's be honest, we do not necessarily have the budget for that. It's better to use money in a more efficient way. And that's how all the different initiatives of the EU are also playing with each other to support R&D, to support capability development, exercising, etc., etc. So, but of course, member states also, if they want to develop their own stuff, they can still do it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Florent, you wanted also to say something about this. Please.
Yeah, space superiority is actually a concept that comes from the US and it makes sense in military doctrine in the US. In Europe, I'm not sure this is what we're looking for. We're not looking for superiority and being more advanced than anybody else, but we're looking for autonomy. And that is the buzzword and the keyword for everything we do, whether it's launchers, space for security, etc. Now, if people have been reading the news also for the last week, including pretty high-level declarations from MEPs, commissioners, etc., there is a real scare that there will be a U.S. disengagement from European security, in which case we won't have the shield of American superiority in space. So it is a discussion on autonomy that we need to have for the threats we will need to face within the couple of decades. It doesn't mean that there will be a change of policy in the US, but it is something that needs to be considered. And in that case, this is where Bricky's work and EDA's work becomes extremely critical, because this is where we plan and anticipate the capabilities we're going to need, because no need for me to remind everybody, a space program basically takes 10 years. A scientific now can be quicker if it's not off the shelf, but at least technology that doesn't require a lot of R&D and innovation. But in a nutshell, you need at least 5 years, which means that if you have a crisis, usually it's already too late to think about your space assets. So it's something we need to anticipate.
Thank you.
If I may also
please
add to this point. So at the European Defence Agency, and it was rightly said as well, that's what we are aiming to do. So to have an harmonization of military requirements so that we can also agree on what the future space capabilities should look like. And as it was said, it's very, the autonomy dimension and the sovereignty dimension is very important in space. So we see member states collaborating in space projects, but more and more at EU level. So here we see also all the EU space programs from the European Commission. And for example, the Secure Connectivity Program is a program that really builds on this sovereignty aspects and autonomy aspects. And here I think it's also interesting to see how the EU is also looking at achieving synergies with the private sector. For example, IRIS², it has this governmental part, but also this commercial part. So here also, I think it's a new way of looking at security and defense. So to really think about having our own systems, but also leaving space for industry and the private sector.
And actually,
Vasilis, you wanted to, just 1 second, Vasilis raised his hand and then Mathieu.
Just on top of what Lucy said, for example, the GovSatcom capability is exactly on the right path. So we're pooling and sharing capabilities that exist in the industry. We know they exist in the industry. Some member states, we are aware that they have their own, SATCOM capabilities at governmental and defense level. But we try to do, and this year we have started our GovSatcom Hub project and contract, I would say. So more things to come by the end of the year. We will expect to give shape, let's say, to something operational. So member states can tap onto and pool or share their SATCOM capabilities. And that, by the way, is also, I should mention also the contribution of EDA working in similar projects and preparing, let's say, the ground.
Thank you. Mathieu?
Yeah, sorry, Vasilios, I didn't see your hand. No, just I think that the point that Lucy mentioned is interesting, that member states are, let's say, more and more keen on working also at EU level on this topic, because if I remember correctly, France announced recently that they decided to forego the development of a third or fourth, let's say, patrimonial military satellite, so Syracuse, which is a SATCOM satellite, because they want to use IRIS² instead of that. And I think it's quite a big move from France in particular, from a major player also in the space field in Europe. So it's quite interesting to see that.
Florent?
Yeah, this is an interesting evolution, because I used to be an EDA a few years ago, and this is already when GovSatcom was being created, and this was the evolution we're seeing. And basically, when the public sector, ESA, CNES, or national space agencies and the EU put in money into industry for programs, it creates competitiveness. And this is not something that should be taken very lightly. And what we saw is the emergence of a very mature SATCOM industry. And this is why now military forces can rely on the quality of the products they're putting on the market. Now, what we're hoping is that the investments that the public sector is making in other domains, Earth observation namely, will also lead to this sort of new market where member states will not need to put in money into whatever 100 million euro satellite, because it will be available on the market. Now, one little thing I want to mention, because we call it sovereign, patrimonial, etc. My experiences, and I am a lawyer by trade, is that it's not a question of sovereignty in the legal sense. I think from at least the user communities, especially in defense, it is a question of assurance and control. So I remind this to everybody in every workshop. Space for security is about data. So all it does, the satellite does, it creates and it transmits data, which means that the actor who uses that data just needs to make sure that there's integrity of the data, that it is securely delivered to him, and that he will have access to it. This is pretty much the philosophy of IRIS². But this is something that doesn't need to be done by public actors, but there needs to be control. And this is where the commercial sector and the public users are at least need to work together and learn how to work together. And it is going to work. There's no question about it. But again, it's going to be a sort of culture change that's probably going to come from the SATCOM sector to maybe some new sectors. That's in my opinion.
Yes, and maybe with this, related to this, when we talk about regions, in most of our regions, SMEs and young entrepreneur, young startups are the protagonists. And how would you see their role in what you were just referring, on the domains you were just referring? Yeah?
I have the question for you. I come from a world where there are a lot of primes, and those primes usually have the capacity to bring in SMEs and innovative solutions. So personally, what I'm seeing is that on services, we have firms that are able to very quickly set up downstream services, but not based on a lot of R&D, which means that it's not that they're piggybacking, but they're exploiting and taking the opportunity of already an evolution in R&D, which doesn't mean they do not do R&D, but to put services on the market so quick at a certain level of price, it means that the work has already been done. SMEs are extremely crucial. Yesterday in Business Bridge, it was swarming with SMEs with extremely intelligent and innovative solutions. I want to remind everybody, because some people usually say, yeah, but SpaceX used to be an SME in new space. It's been in the environment for 20, 25 years with significant public contracts. And usually this is how you build up a very huge case. It has been the case 50 years ago with the Airbuses, the Thales, the OHBs, etc. So SMEs are extremely crucial, but I think they're probably segments of what we do in security. And when we talk about IRIS², for example, we're in a different dimension. It doesn't mean SMEs will not have a stake in it or an added value, not at all. But we are in the development of an infrastructure that is so wide and large that usually it requires manufacturing and system development capacities that are very specific.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mathieu, you wanted to compliment?
No, I would just mention what I said also, because I think it was also mentioned in the previous webinar from Nereus, but also developing this kind of clusters where you can put together companies with, working on space, and it can also create some, accumulation on all the kind of technologies they want to develop. There are some of France, there are in the UK, etc. And probably this is something where the regions and regional authorities can actually have a direct impact, because they can also favor the establishment of such clusters. They can also provide potential administrative support, and they can attract these companies so that they can work together. So I would say it's something that could be useful. And maybe from a user perspective, I know that competencies of regions are different from one country to another, but if like a service, is working on, again, on, disaster management, etc., we could also, let's say, encourage them to use space more, because it will also develop the ecosystem, etc., etc. So I would say these two aspects could be interesting.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We are pretty much came to the end. Yeah, please, Florent.
No, I think Lucy was raising her hand, but
yes, please.
Yes, actually, just also to build on what was said on SMEs and their role, so they can really stimulate innovation, and that was reaffirmed a lot in the past days in the European Space Conference and in general. And for example, SMEs are our main stakeholders in terms of our hub for defense innovation. So for example, we had an EDA Innovation Prize call on space-based space situational awareness. And here SMEs were very active in that domain actually as well. And Florent, you mentioned IRIS², and I know that also in IRIS² and in all the part that will be contributed to by the commercial sector, SMEs are very put at the forefront as well. And I know that there are some provisions in the IRIS² regulation for the inclusion of SMEs, because we know that they can really also stimulate that innovation aspect.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, Florent?
That's very true. As far as I remember, there's even a percentage for SMEs. But here, there's nobody here from DEFIS, but this is going back to a very...
sorry, Florent, I think it is 30%. It was said during the European Space Conference.
Okay, I remember it was 20, but maybe it's 30, so thank you. And this brings me to a very key point, which is industrial policy. And I'm one of the proponents of directed economies in a way, or at least we're in the public sector where political decisions need to be made for at least an industrial output. And this is created. It doesn't happen overnight. So we don't have launchers today in the north of Europe and every which way just by chance. That's because there was an industrial policy that made it happen. And I think it's what we're hearing now, we're at a turning point where industry is maturing to such a point that us, at least as public actors, we need to rethink how we are going to undertake industrial policy and with what procurement methods. Now, I think what DEFIS is doing, enlarging to the defense sector, is extremely significant as well, because we all know that the firms doing and catering space also cater defense. And they are firms, and it is industrial processes that are very much alike. And I think at least what we're trying to do in terms of industrial policy for defense, we can actually take lessons learned from what we did in space and even have synergies in the future. But this is a wider conversation, maybe for another webinar, which is industrial policy for space and security and defense.
Good. We are ready to develop a program with you together. Look forward for proposals of potential speakers and cases to be involved. So we got, I think, what was the richness of today's debate, really the different perspectives. We had a think tank with us, we had the European Space Agency, we had the European Defense Agency, and also EUSPA shared initiative. Is there anything you would like to share with the participants before we close? On the way you see cooperation, on the way what you would like participants to take away from this discussion. Yeah, Florent.
I guess I'll start here. I mean, around the table, we have people we've been cooperating with since forever and new partners, whether it's EUSPA, etc. And I think cooperation, but the whole discussion between the commercial sector and the public sector is, I think we need to rethink exactly where we as public actors are required. ESA, at least not being an EU agency, still acts within the EU community and the European community. What we're trying to do is deliver technologies and assets for European actors, which are not us, which means that it is a question of trust, it is a question of trial and error, but I'm very confident that within all the constraints everybody has, member states, our EU partners, etc., there are ways and means for us to do this always in a better way. So there is an onslaught right now of initiatives coming from the EU, which is very welcome by ESA. We are very supportive of anything that goes in the security and more security in Europe. And ESA is still the EU's main partner for space. And we're looking forward to developing new space components for security users, whether it's EDA, DEFIS, EUSPA, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Lucy?
Yes, from my side, just one main takeaway I would say for the audience would be all the synergies and the interaction between civil and defense uses of space and space assets in general. So if you are a stakeholder that is very much involved in space or is dealing with people and companies that are involved in space, just also to know the potential also for defense and the defense markets and defense capabilities in general in that regard.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, yeah, please, Vasilis.
Oh, sorry, I didn't raise it. I raised it physically, my hand. Lucy mentioned the synergies, and I think that was a critical word also from our side in EUSPA due to our, let's say, mandate and the way we work transversally in the various EU space program components. So working more on transversality is the message I want to reflect on. Working on the downstream, because on the application side, we see a lot of potential for the synergies. You know, when we think about programs, sometimes we develop them in a kind of silos, I would say, but on the downstream there, and the discussion before was on SMEs, there we see a lot of opportunities for SMEs, bringing all the little pieces of the different programs together into excellent solutions and applications that the users can tap on.
Yes, please, Mathieu.
Yeah,
wanted to
my opinion. But like for cooperation, of course, let's also just make sure, and maybe it's more for the space sector, but that responsibilities are clear also for people external to the space sector, so that it's also easier for them to let's say know who to contact, and also to increase the uptake of space in general for security and defense purposes.
Thank you. Yes, I found the example that Florent gave with the biologist, with the PhD of the biologist, who gathered actually quite important information for the French Defense Ministry and their submarine activities, that we can't distinguish so exactly anymore between civil and military or resilience activities, that both are really closely interlinked, and that especially when we talk about and discuss the use of satellite data and services, this is very relevant. Good. Thank you so much for joining this discussion. Thank you for your presentation. We will share them with the participants, if you agree. And we keep in touch. We work on the program for the next debate, focused on using satellite data for humanitarian purposes and how this contributes to make it safer and create more safety and security on the ground. With this, I wish you a good day and thank everybody, and especially the speakers for preparing so well and giving us really illustrative, good examples from the activities of their organizations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you very much.